Good afternoon, everyone, and that was a delicious meal. Thank you, Chamber of Commerce. Let's give them a round of applause. It's rough being to session right after lunch. So in case anybody falls asleep and snores, I give the person next to you permission to elbow you in the arm and wake you up. And that goes for you guys on the mic with me too, okay? So we'll go forward to there. We are going to be talking about promising practices in ground transportation. We have 4 distinguished panel members here, and you see their name and their title, but I'm going to ask them for 15 or 20 seconds to introduce themselves, and then we can get into the panel discussions. And our panel discussion will be a little bit different today. We actually came up with 4 and hopefully 5 if we have time for questions in a straw poll that we did. And we feel that this is going to be relevant to the audience today, and hopefully these 4 experts will be able to shed light on those questions. So, Jim, why don't you go ahead and talk about who you are and what you do?
Sure. You got one somewhere. Oh, here.
Oh, now I have 2.
I am Jim Lewis. I'm the communications manager for the Amtrak Police Department. I basically manage all communications with employees and customers in relation to the Amtrak Police Department, but I've also had a lead role in the human trafficking awareness program at Amtrak for our employees and also our traveling public.
Excellent, thank you. Jeff?
Jeff Leonard well, there's the title there. But what that means is it's basically souped up communications. I write speeches, I talk to reporters, but it's really about looking at our industry, our industry's image, and in areas where we have a positive image, how do you enhance it? In areas where you have a negative image, how do you look at it differently? And by that, fixing it and then bragging about it. It is not a PR exercise, it is an exercise in changing something and then moving on from there. Where do we fit in transportation? Convenience stores sell about 80% of the gas purchased in the country, about 32 million fill-ups a day out of the 40 million fill-ups, and we get about 160 million transactions a day. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's basically half the US population. So if you didn't go to a convenience store yesterday, you did today, and if you didn't do either one of those, somebody's making up for you. So that's the intro.
Amazing numbers. Ann, please.
I'm Annie Sovic. I'm the director of, I'm the senior director of programs and strategic initiatives at Truckers Against Trafficking. Prior to being in this role, I was the director of TATS Busing on the Lookout program. So I spent about 4.5 years overseeing our program, working with the bus industry, so commercial, public transportation, motor coach, also school bus. And now in my current role, I oversee that program along with our Coalition Build program, which seeks to build public-private partnerships between industry and law enforcement, as well as our Empower Freedom program that partners with energy, oil and gas companies, and TAT works in the US and Canada, and then supports an NGO partner in Mexico.
Thanks, Ann. And let me just say that when I came to the Blue Campaign about 7 months ago, I found out about Truckers Against Trafficking, and I actually went online, took your course, and I passed it. So thank you very, very much. Elise, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elise Maialino. I'm the Global Head of Women's Safety and Personal Safety at Uber. Part of my job involves engaging with experts and advocates, including those who work on anti-human trafficking efforts, and to get their feedback and implement some of that into our product design and into our policies at Uber. So we're really grateful to have those partnerships. Since 2015, we have been raising awareness on human trafficking and have done so in different parts of the world, including in the US, in Canada, and in places like Latin America. So really happy to be here today.
Thank you, guys, and let's go ahead and get started. Our first question: human trafficking is a global issue impacting every community. Can you tell us a little bit about how you approach to helping to address this social issue? Ann, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So Truckers Against Trafficking is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking, bus, and energy industries to combat human trafficking in the course of their everyday jobs. So what does that mean, or how does that play out? We develop niche-specific training resources, partner with various players within the industry, from large corporations like UPS to small, mom and pop truck stops or bus companies, and really everything in between. And our theory of change really is rooted in the belief that by educating and equipping members of these target industries, that we can activate millions of people to move from passive bystanders to active disruptors of human trafficking. And I would just like to share a couple of examples of TAT's work in action. So in 2015, a truck driver in Virginia noticed some suspicious activity connected to an RV that was parked in this same truck stop that he had stopped at, and called police that then came on the scene, and after engaging with the suspects and a potential victim, determined that a young woman had been tortured for multiple weeks and was being sold for sex by the owners of the RV. So in another incident a couple of years ago, a bus driver on a route between Cleveland and Chicago was approached by a young woman on his bus who told him that she was being held against her will and forced into prostitution by a male passenger on that same bus. Now, that driver had recently just completed our training for the bus industry along with the safety team. He alerted dispatch, who engaged law enforcement, who arrived on the scene. And again, after some additional investigation and questioning, they referred the suspected victim for services, and the alleged trafficker was arrested. In other examples, security guard at a transit center in San Diego, noticing kind of suspicious engagement from a man who was kind of seen sort of lurking around the transit center, approaching young women in a way that seemed to make them feel uncomfortable, flagged their suspicions, saved the footage on the security cameras, noted his license plate when he came back, again, kind of approaching young women in ways that seemed to make them uncomfortable. They notified the San Diego Human Trafficking Task Force that initiated an investigation that later culminated in the arrest of that man and an accomplice who were holding a young woman against her will at a hotel outside of Los Angeles. And so just like time and time and time again, what we've seen at Truckers Against Trafficking is that when people know what to look for, how to report it effectively, that they can really serve as an extra set of eyes and ears for law enforcement in recovering victims and arresting traffickers.
And thank you. So what we're hearing is awareness, education leads to hopefully more human trafficking awareness and the stopping of that. Shamir earlier in our conversation, in our panel earlier, talked about truck stops also. So it seems to be a reoccurring theme, and the more training we can do and the more awareness we can do, the better. I think that, it will definitely happen. Elise, a little bit about what you wanted to say.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So at Uber, we believe that if you're going to combat human trafficking, you're going to require sustained efforts from many sectors and many companies like Uber. So we want to be part of the solution. We want to help. We want to leverage our scale in order to make it possible to get educational materials to folks who might be able to assist. And so we are one of the few technology companies that has an opportunity to operate kind of in the real world on the ground and who connects people every day. And so we want to do our part to make sure that we can kind of leverage that to make a difference. So in terms of our approach to human trafficking, I would say that it's primarily based on the advice of experts. We've had the privilege of working, as I've mentioned, with a number of organizations like Polaris or ECPAT USA, and we look to them to help us in the development of really tailored educational materials, kind of as you've mentioned, and to find ways to explain to folks, users on our platform, like drivers or delivery people, what to look for in terms of how to identify human trafficking, how it might show up, and then what to do in the event that they hear or see something suspicious that might have occurred. So that's kind of our main approach, is to really work with people who know the best ways to kind of present information to folks who might not have a lot of time to review that material, but who can quickly get some information that could be useful to them. And then maybe I'll just end by saying, of course, as you've heard other people mention today, drivers, for instance, are the eyes and ears on the ground. Every day they're seeing things that might raise concern. They're hearing things that they might not know what to do about, or that might look like human trafficking. And so ensuring that we can support them and provide them routinely with information that they might find useful is really core to the work we're doing. And I think Uber has a real potential to make an impact given the scale and the size of our work around the world.
Elise, thank you. How many rides a day does Uber provide, a round number, if you could?
Yeah, so every day is a little different. So on average, globally, we're looking at about 21 million rides a day.
Okay. So if we go back to Nicole's slide where she talked about percentage of use in traffic, and we saw that cars, we saw that rail was big in transporting traffickers from point A to point B. We have, what was that number again?
21 million.
21 million people taking rides at Uber. 80% of them have to go get gas at convenience stores. If they go to a truck stop, that's part of you. And if they take rail, Jim, God bless you, what would you say you need to do to add more to your human trafficking efforts to stop this on the rail system or in general?
Well, I think first I'd like to talk about what we've already done. And it's nice to be in a room of so many people that I've partnered with to actually get the job done. And all of that began in April of 2012 when DHS and DOT approached us with a partnership to train our frontline employees and our police officers. Later that year at a press conference, our CEO made the decision at the moment to decide to roll out the training to all employees at Amtrak. So that distribution of training material continued yearly after that. It was refreshed in 2018 with a video developed by the Amtrak Police Department. Training materials were updated again by the Amtrak Police Human Trafficking Working Group, which I'll speak about later, in partnership with Human Resources, and was distributed to all employees in 2022. That was approximately 18,000 employees received that training. In educating the traveling public, we display the Blue Campaign videos and also A21 Can You See Me videos, and we have large monitors in our stations. Those videos play daily. And also the Amtrak Police Department includes a section dedicated to sharing human trafficking information and those videos as well. To continue those efforts, the Amtrak Police Department Human Trafficking Working Group was launched in October of 2020, and to develop methods for mitigating the potential for human trafficking in the passenger rail system. That was the idea. The group consists of, I'm the lead, I have a senior crimes and criminal intelligence analyst, detectives, investigators, and recently we just were joined by a manager, safety and security analytics. So it's a really robust group. We're also polling our department to see what other members of the Amtrak Police Department would want to come on board and try and build this department, this group out as much as possible.
I like the fact that you're actually going back to your employees and asking what more can we do, and,
Right.
and that helps, and that helps a real good. Jeff, let me go to you for a minute. How has your perspective changed over the years as you've been involved in raising the awareness on human trafficking with your employees and the public, if you could?
So I want to set this up with just real quick numbers, and the numbers check out. I did them this morning. There are 150,000 convenience stores in the country. Now, if you add up every grocery store, every dollar store, every drug store, and then throw in every McDonald's and every Starbucks, you get to 150,000. So that's roughly the context of how many convenience stores there are in the country. And as powerful as I look, I can't tell any of them what to do. We're an association. So the key for us is we have to nudge is the bad thing, nudge our members in the right direction and to tell the story about why they want to get invested into something that if you're a brand manager or if you're a PR person, you're always told, don't affiliate your brand with something negative. Don't do that. So how do you look at that as a positive? How do you change that narrative? And that was the biggest learning lesson from when we started 7, 8 years ago. It's the idea of reframing everything. And the previous session was all on technology. This is really more about eyes and ears. And how can you tell people they are eyes and ears in the community, that they can make a difference, and particularly using consumer surveys to kind of identify where we were perceived, and how do we change that narrative. Now, the thing that we would always be seen as a negative is 24-hour operations. Nobody does anything good at 2 in the morning. That's basically what people think. If you're up at 2 in the morning, you're up to no good. So, but there are people that work second and third shifts. There are people that are heroes in the community, and there are people who want to get away from bad people at 2 in the morning, and we are open for that. So how can you set up systems where you're there for the vulnerable people? And going through that whole process and looking through their eyes was really that whole journey. Because when it started, it's kind of, okay, not seeing the connection, but the more you spend time with something, and you try to see, how can we get our members to buy in? That's where you got the real movement.
And James, you mentioned in your last response that you saw like a change in your employees and how you're using them to move forward in your anti-human trafficking efforts. Could you go into that in a little detail if you could?
Well, we actually have gotten, I wouldn't call it feedback, but we have had tips that have come back from our employees, some of them literally after they just took the training. So it's a clear indication that it is working. The biggest thing we need to get over is that the fear of being wrong. Some people tend to hold back and not want to report something because they're worried that they're going to be told they were wrong, but that's never something that should ever be considered. It's important to report anything to move this thing forward.
And do you empower your employees to do such? And if they make a mistake, that's okay, because you rather let them see something and say something than be quiet?
Absolutely, and anything that's ever reported, whether it's see something, say something, or anything related to human trafficking, everything is investigated. So there's never a reason to say, no, that's not what you believe it is. Everything is looked into.
Interesting comments. Ann, I'm going to talk to you about this for a minute. We're here today because it's a partnership. DHS, DOT, United States Chamber of Commerce, and every speaker and everybody in the room. We're a partnership trying to combat human trafficking. What is your message, and how important is partnerships in your role with your association to combating human trafficking?
Yeah, so for Truckers Against Trafficking, I mean, all of our work is done through partners, through industry partners, through public sector partners, through law enforcement. I mean, we're a staff of, gosh, we just hired a couple new people. I think we're up to 18 or 19 people now. I mean, we're a small staff, but we have registered over 1.5 million people as trained with our materials. And the only way we do that is through partnerships. And so I think, I mean, to Jeff's point on kind of how do you approach people and how do you tap into, I think, that real desire that most people have to want to do good in the world, to want to make a difference, to care about others, but also to not really know what to do in some circumstances or how to act, but to provide them with information, with tools, with resources that can allow them to act as they want to. I mean, and one of the things that has been so striking to me over the years, in my work with TAT, is on, in conversations with truck drivers or bus drivers who can reflect in incredible detail incidents that they had seen years prior to receiving TAT training, that at the point that they heard a presentation or watched a video, that started to connect these dots on, wow, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the ability at that time, and I didn't have the knowledge at that time to connect it to human trafficking, but now moving forward, that they're able to, and that they're able to know that the National Human Trafficking Hotline is there, that there are potentially protocols in place within their company, within their organization, within their agency to then be reporting it so that they can then act. It's incredibly empowering. And again, all of that is done through partnerships and a really empowerment-oriented model.
Jeff, being another association, how do you combine your partnerships and your efforts on human trafficking, or any other initiatives that you have within the convenience store?
Well, I'll just talk about 3 of them. Started with National Safe Place Network, and that is a group that's supported by Quick Trip, spelled with a Q, QT for those that regularly visit them. And what they do is they have a program for youth in crisis. And if somebody really feels uncomfortable, doesn't want to go home, doesn't want to go wherever, they will help you. And they're equipped to do this. And if you're not comfortable going home, eventually that could lead to a runaway situation, that could lead to a trafficking situation. So it's a way of looking at the issue before it's an issue. So I'm now on the board of that. We are trying to see how do we get more. It's not right for everyone because you need busy stores. You need multiple people on staff. You need big stores. But that's one initiative that we're working with. Second one, it started when I went to Bend, Oregon, and there's this guy named Kent Couch. He has one store, Shell Station. If you Google him, he's in the Guinness World Record book for having the longest balloon ride in a lawn chair in the world. So interesting guy. He also has 32 beers on tap in a Shell station. But I went to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom, and they had one of these on the bathroom window. And this is a freedom sticker. It was started by this outfit called Convenience Stores Against Trafficking, similar name. And it was first tried in Bend. And I noticed the number here, very prominent, was crossed out. And I asked him, I said, what's up with the, and he says, that means it's working. And that means that they know that people are looking at these and they're finding them effective and we have to replace them. And he said, it's sad, but it's true. So I contacted this group. They have these stickers in 30,000 convenience stores in bathrooms. And the idea is in bathrooms is often the only place where somebody's trafficked has a moment of peace. You may not make the phone call there, you may not even have the phone, but you might be able to memorize or write down or start the conversation about how you can connect to someone who cares about you. And then the third one is DHS. Now, working with these first 2 programs, by the time we talked to DHS, it didn't need a whole lot of explaining about what was going on, why it's of value. And the big thing about partnerships is, I don't know if it's true with a lot of other places, but National Association of Convenience Stores, we call ourselves NACs. And we have a great propensity to NACSify everything. We got to run it through our lens, and you got to do all this stuff. But when you're working with partners, and you're working with partners you trust, you get the best of both worlds. And you don't have to NACSify everything. You could say, hey, you know what? You guys, let's just put you in touch with the right people. Let's take it from here. And partnerships really expands your knowledge base because you can't just hire endless staff. And when you work with a good partner, they are your staff.
Jim, talk to me a little bit about Amtrak and partnerships, if you could.
Sure. Partnerships in regard to human trafficking are vitally important for the work that we want to do, not only with our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, but our partnerships with organizations such as Polaris, Truckers Against Trafficking, A21, 24/7, United Against Slavery. They all have a part in the work that we're doing. Based on the information we got from the survey, the NOSH survey from United Against Slavery, we are partnering with A21 to work on developing a new training program for our law enforcement officers. 24/7, we have their QR code stickers in our train stations that have service from Amtrak. They're in the restrooms in the inside door of the stall to provide services to any victim that might scan the QR code. All of that is vitally important for us to get the job done.
We mentioned the stickers or the placards or the posters in the back of restrooms walls. And Jeff, I appreciated that you said, hey, we know it's working if they're trying to scratch it out. And somebody in an earlier panel talked about acrylic posters. And I think that's a great idea, something to take away, because traffickers know where to stop and where not to stop. And usually, I think talking with you earlier, they will go into the bathroom and make sure that there's no signage before they let their trafficked people go into them. And if there's something there, they're going to try to mark it out. You know, so just put your mind in that mindset and see where it goes. Elise, over to you for a minute on Uber. You have a whole different totally mindset because you have so many different drivers and so many rides a day and things of that nature. Partnerships with Uber, how does that work with you, and what do you look for in a partnership to make it work, if I could?
Oh, yeah, those are great questions. Thank you. I mentioned a couple of the partners that we've worked with previously. Some of our team has also had the privilege of working with Truckers Against Trafficking as well. And so I think for us, those are really vital to, as I've mentioned, getting really key information to folks who need it. So maybe I'll just take a moment to talk a little bit about the tailored education that we have developed with some of these partners, and how do we get that education to drivers and delivery people. So to start, we make education available in a few different ways. Firstly, we have these places called green light hubs, and green light hubs are places where drivers can go in person in their communities to get support. We have information available, tips and information available to drivers there so they can actually pick things up physically. There was around major sporting events. We've used these green light hubs. We partnered before with It's a Penalty to create and to have available at these green light hubs hang tags that have the National Human Trafficking hotline number on them. So that folks can hang those in their vehicles. So thinking about that is really important. We also provide education, as our partners have taught us, routinely at multiple times of the year, and sending reminders frequently. And we have the ability as a technology company to do that through our app. So we're able to send messages in app, and we're also able to send emails to our drivers and to people who are looking for that information. So again, around major sporting events, but we're sending out communications in recognition of National Month of Awareness around human trafficking. So we pick different times in the year, and we tweak the messages and change them, and we work with our partners to do that. And so some of the information that we include in that material are things like tips. So sometimes that could be like, pay particular attention to the location that you're picking people up at or dropping people off at. Are you being asked to stop at a hidden entrance or a back door? Does it seem generally unsafe? We've heard people give some stories today around what that might look like. We ask them to pay particular attention to the rider's condition. Do they appear to be disoriented or lost? Do they not know what city that they're in? And so giving some of that context is really great. And our partners have helped us identify these tips, but have also helped us articulate that not one of those things is necessarily an indicator of human trafficking. And so even just that has been really helpful in the partnerships that we've had, and kind of thinking more as like a whole and providing a spectrum or a range of tips has been really useful. And our partners have been so great of helping us adjust those over time. So that's something that has been really, really helpful. And then I think the second thing to do is to provide information on what do you do when you're in a situation when you're suspecting that maybe something is happening, and how do we kind of give folks information on that? And I think the couple of things that we've been able to provide are, obviously, if there's anyone in immediate danger, calling 911 is just so important, and encouraging people, giving them permission to do that. And they can do that through our app. So if they want to click on the emergency button, they'll be connected to 911 and law enforcement, or they could do that off the app, but that is available to them, and making them aware of that is important. And then, of course, we've learned that national hotlines, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, for instance, is a great place to go even if folks are unsure and just want to talk to someone or ask a question or tell them about something that they saw. And maybe they only have one small piece of the story, but somebody else has the other part of that story. And a place like a hotline can kind of help make that bridge in a way that we wouldn't be able to, right? So I think those are some of, and there are more, but those are some of the things that folks have pointed out to us as just being really helpful. And then I think I would also mention that we've had the opportunity to partner with AGs, attorneys general across the United States, and we really value those partnerships as well. They've helped us to bring information to Greenlight hubs, et cetera, but they've also helped us to bring attention and raise awareness to the things that we do have. So there have been AGs who've done videos, and we accompany a video that Polaris has developed for Uber, and we've accompanied that Polaris video that we send to drivers and delivery folks with videos from AGs. Again, just to kind of incentivize or to kind of bring attention to the fact that this is important and substantive information that you might want to look at. And so we're really grateful to have the opportunity to do that and hope to continue to do that over the years as well. So that's a little bit of that. Maybe I'll pause there and let others jump in.
No, that's fine, Elise, thank you. And this is a question that we haven't talked about before, but we just talked about partnerships and the importance of partnerships. And I'm going to ask each one of you this question. In the partnerships that you have, what is the best way that you utilize these partnerships to advance human trafficking awareness, if I could? And we have different groups here. We have people who find partners, and we have people on the panel here who are partners. So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you that question real quick, and now all four of us are going to talk about that here.
First off, one other thing. Our efforts hopefully can help people and get people out of trafficking. But when you think of people who are trafficked, the other thing is a feeling of loneliness, a feeling of no one caring. And even if they're still in that situation, repetition of message, if they see people care, I think that can go a long ways towards getting them in a better place whenever that day is. But in terms of what we've done, and I mentioned in the beginning, we can't tell our members what to do. What we do is we look at how do we put it in their terms. And one of the things we do is, everybody in this room probably has to speak to regulators, has to speak to, in some cases, people that affect your business via NIMBY, et cetera, and then employees. And so we've done some consumer surveys where we've bucketed consumers. Are you a opinion leader? Do you vote? Do you go to zoning hearings, et cetera? Are you a potential employee, or are you a customer? And we had 25 different messages that were all positive about our industry. We're open 24 hours, we do this. They were meant to be positive messages. The one that tested the highest for customers and opinion leaders was related to the fight against human trafficking, that we are eyes and ears. And it was number 3 for potential employees. The top 2 were related to benefits. So the message resonates. And once you have that data, and then you go to people and you say, hey, look, this is the ROI. You want to do things, and everybody wants to do things to make their communities better, but this is effective. And this is what your customers want to see. This is what people want to see when you go to zoning hearings. This is what they want to see when they're talking about a regulation that involves your industry. It's really powerful. And it's doing the right thing and showing them that there's metrics associated with it that are good for business.
Ann, do you want to add a little bit to that, please?
On your question, on your earlier question connected to...
Pick a question.
I'll talk about kind of what we recommend our partners and kind of how kind of best practices and how we see that most effective. I mean, I would say first and foremost, one of the main things that Truckers Against Trafficking offers is this series of niche-specific training videos. They're intended to be kind of push and play, self-sufficient, so that the person facilitating the training doesn't have to feel like they have to be an expert in the topic in order to share and disseminate really high quality information that is really intended for that audience. And so, with partners that we're working with, first and foremost, we're asking them to train. Train all of their current employees and build in this training to their orientation so that all new employees are also getting this information. And I think, on the industry side, that has kind of two big impacts. One is the awareness raising, but the other is that management is sending the message to their employees that this is important for the company, and they're also sending the message that we support you in taking efforts to look for this, to respond to this, to act if you see suspicions. So also along with that, and this is something with kind of lessons learned and areas of growth, is also making sure that training goes along with reporting protocols so that employees know what's expected of them, know what to do, but also, and this came up in the earlier panel, there's different types of scenarios that you might be dealing with. There's the one scenario of you have a suspicion, but you haven't necessarily kind of interacted with someone who's asking for help. And there's a very different scenario. The bus driver who had a woman come up to him and say she was being held against her will and forced into prostitution. That reaction, call law enforcement, get law enforcement on the scene, help that person who is asking for help in that moment. Do not let this opportunity pass. Those are pretty different scenarios. So make sure that as you're looking at internal protocols, that they're addressing the different scenarios and the different ways that that people may be interacting with, potential victims or just suspicions about human trafficking. And then the other piece for us is really encouraging our partners to adopt anti-trafficking in persons policies with a demand reduction focus, essentially saying that company time, company equipment cannot be used for purchasing commercial sex, enforce that, set up enforcement mechanisms, train people on that, but also look at where the different channels are for awareness raising and for further kind of leveraging their networks. What spaces are you working within? How can you be a leader within your industry? How can you be a leader within your community? How can you continue to kind of spread this message and spread this information? And the last thing I'll say on that is connected to our law enforcement partnerships. We both do training with law enforcement, really emphasizing aspects of investigations, but also on how to take a victim-centered approach and always work with survivors in the course of those trainings and really elevate those survivor voices and tips and their expertise. But also looking at the various ways that law enforcement, and in our context, commercial vehicle enforcement, create new channels for information sharing to industry. So looking at all of the different channels that exist through our public sector partners to reach more potential industry partners.
I'm going to ask all four of you the same question. Each of you have implemented a hugely successful human trafficking program. What would you do differently if you had to do it all over again? That would be a best practice for everybody in the audience. Jim, let's start with you.
Just speaking from my own experience, I sort of started off on my own, and now that I have a working group that I am a member of, and also the network of different agencies and NGOs that, I literally consider them to be members of our working group. I would have turned that around and started with a working group. It's something definitely investigate who is as driven as you are in addressing the issue of human trafficking, whether it's in your own department or within your organization, and talk about partnering together, putting your heads together to come up with ideas on how you're going to address what happens in your area, in transportation or convenience stores or wherever it might be.
Excellent. Elise?
Yeah, thank you for that. A couple things have come up while folks have been talking that triggered thoughts for me that I have not mentioned yet. But I think if I look back on kind of some of Uber's journey over the last little while, I think one of the things that I recognize is that we really have a multi-pronged approach when it comes to our work on human trafficking. And I think sometimes there's a desire at the beginning to get everything exactly right and to know what all of those prongs are and to activate them. And I think that giving folks kind of a little bit of a break on some of that and realizing that you're going to have to evolve things over time and that things are going to change and that you might want to add another prong that you hadn't thought of previously. I think that's really important. Something I have not talked about yet, but I was reminded of is an important partnership that we have with law enforcement. And I think that that's a really unique feature of some of our work. We have a team of former law enforcement that work at Uber on our public safety and on our global investigations team. And so these folks are able to develop really wonderful relationships with law enforcement who are active today, and they get that. They've lived that before, and I think it's really unique to be able to have that relationship. Uber has a law enforcement portal where law enforcement can access the portal and request information from Uber or support from Uber in an investigation. And so our teams are on standby, and we're ready to assist in the event that we can be helpful. And so I think that, in addition to some of the other measures that we have, again, sometimes take time. We might not have, and we still might not be getting things right all the time. And I think recognizing that you have an ability to grow, that you have an ability to change, and that what tactics that you used originally might need to be adapted over time. And I think that that's okay. And so yeah, those are some thoughts.
Anne, how about you? Any comments on that?
Yeah, not necessarily if we're going to do it again, but more areas that I would like to see us grow and improve, and perhaps had we been able to put some of these in place earlier on, we'd be in a better spot. One is on data collection, information sharing, making sure that those feedback mechanisms are strong, and how do you build those systems in for all of these partners we're working with, all of these people that we're training, and people who are making calls or reporting suspicions or just helping, not where they're engaging law enforcement, but I mean, we do hear stories of people that are offering just kind words, assistance, giving a sandwich, giving a glass of water, but also kind of helping someone along their way in their path to freedom. But how do we set up better mechanisms for getting that information back to better understand the crime, the interactions, but also the role that our partners and their networks are playing? And then the other piece, and I think that there has been improvements in recent years in the kind of anti-trafficking movement more broadly, and I like to think that TAT is improving in this area too, but of really looking more to elevating survivor voices, hearing survivor perspectives, but also making sure that we're tapping into kind of diverse perspectives, diverse experiences, to really make sure that the trainings that we're using, the information that we're sharing, is telling the true story about the realities of human trafficking and is reflecting kind of the diversity, but also really the disproportionate victimization of people who are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And I think that's critically important.
Jeff, any comments?
Two things. First, when you're put in charge of something, the presumption is you have all the answers. And you have to pause, you have to say, hey, somebody said a long time ago, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that order. So listen as much as you can. Know that you don't have the answers. Know that wherever the finish line is, the way you designed it originally, it's going to be better if it's something else. So just being vulnerable and just saying, I don't know, and learning, and maybe tearing up a couple timelines along the way and saying, okay, let's get this right because I don't have things right now. The other thing is seeing is believing. And when you're in the midst of something and you see this, and I've gone to these pre-Super Bowl events where they have these booklets of like 40 kids in peril that they want to find. And you look at these kids' faces, and then you see after a couple days, they find half of them. Now, maybe it doesn't end permanently happy, but when you see the dedication of all these people and you're the one doing it, that's awesome. You're committed. How do you do that to everybody else? And how do you bring others along? How do you say, hey, you know what? I've done this for a couple of years. Come on with me this year. Check this out. Giving a brochure, watching a video, they're effective, but they're really effective when you can bring somebody in the weeds with you. That's where you really get somebody that's an advocate.
All great information, and now the final question, if we could. If there was a human trafficking genie, and he granted one wish to you to make your program better, or to do something different, or to satisfy a need, what would that be? Jim, go ahead.
Probably just to raise the level of understanding. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm up to the top of my boots in this, and I just assume everyone knows what I'm talking about. So if there were a magic way to make everyone as aware of human trafficking and, you know, the indicators and how terrible it is, maybe we should have them all, you know, listen to a survivor, because that sort of is what's done me and made me buy in 100%.
Absolutely. Shamir was fantastic this morning. Jeff?
I'd have the genie get rid of human trafficking. But
Great answer.
no, it's just stay with it, see how it needs to be modified, you know, and pay attention to it. Just because it's done doesn't mean it's effective. And how do you just, when you start a program, everything's brainstorming, everything's new ideas, and then something becomes institutionalized and you tend to go, okay, well, let's just change the date, let's do this. But you know, how do you relook at things and say, you know, do we have the metrics that support it? Again, how do you bring people along with you so that it's not over time your thing, but it's everybody's thing? So yeah, that's multiple genies, I guess, working together.
Ann, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Truckers Against Trafficking, it is that have those key accelerators on just kind of building more partnerships, building more awareness. On kind of anti-trafficking work generally, I mean, if I had a genie, I would love to ask them to do more to support survivors. Invest more on resources to help with job opportunities, with housing, transportation, all of these different pieces that continue to be these barriers and challenges that survivors are experiencing after they exit their situation. And there's just so much more that needs to be done in that space that does then serve this preventative role as well.
Elise?
So human trafficking is one part of the work that we do on safety more broadly at Uber. Some folks might know that we do things like release a safety report at Uber, and we're one of the few companies that does something like that. And I think what we've learned from doing human trafficking work, but also from doing work on safety, is that companies might be afraid to get into this space. There is a lot of media scrutiny, or there are reasons why it might not be attractive to try to engage in some of these really tough conversations. And I think if we could kind of reach out to those companies and say, give it a try, speak to an expert, speak to us if you'd like to know about our experience and our journey. And the more of us who are out there, who are trying to be part of the solution, the more impact that we can have. So I think that'd be my wish.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions. We have a few minutes left. Here she comes. Thank you. Yes, questions, anyone? Please raise your hands.
A lot of questions. My partner and I were sitting here just chit-chatting away as you were talking. As I said, my name's Delmas Whitaker. I'm with the Port of Seattle. So the one thing that's, as a destination port with a very robust tourism and cruise industry, and not to mention our terminal operations with trucking and so forth, There's a lot of things that you all have discussed today that I thought was very helpful. The one thing, I'm just going to put one person on the hot seat right now, and that's Elise. And so, Elise, I was very intrigued to hear some of the information that you and the drivers are gathering regarding things that they see. How does an agency like me be able to get to some of that data to say, where we see where there may be these areas where there are, a lot of indicators are popping up that may allude to there may be some activity we should think about. How do we get that?
That's an excellent question, and I can tell you some of the basics, but I think the best thing that I could tell you to do is to go to our law enforcement portal, which is available online, and that portal will link you to the folks in our company who I had mentioned who are on our global investigations team and on our public safety team, and they actually provide education to folks who work in law enforcement or in spaces who would like access to some of the information that we might be able to provide, and give them information on how to request some of that. So that would be the place that I would direct you to, and know that we have folks who are there whose job it is to work with communities and to try to find ways to investigate or to use the information that we have available to try to work together to combat some of these things. So hopefully that's helpful. I can connect with you after as well. Great.
Next question.
Yeah, this is a bit of a forward-looking question. So we have been seeing, those of us who work in the trafficking space have been seeing a very, very significant push to decriminalize sex buying and pimping, which are the laws that most trafficking cases are prosecuted under. And it's been really concerning to survivors of trafficking that this could potentially happen. So we've seen these cases in DC, we've seen it in New York, Portland just had or Oregon just had a sex buyer put out a ballot measure to decriminalize sex buying and pimping and decriminalize the whole sex trade. So, and we're seeing some of the policy practices in Seattle, and what we know as experts is that when those things are decriminalized, trafficking just goes through the roof in the countries where sex buying and pimping have been decriminalized. And we're seeing it in Seattle on our track. And so we've got folks like the Washington Retail Association coming and supporting bills and policies that we're working on because it has a really negative impact on the businesses on those corridors. So I just wanted to ask sort of, what would be the impact on the businesses that you're working in if sex buying and pimping were decriminalized at a national or at a state level?
Anybody want to take that? Jeff, go ahead.
I'll answer the question without answering the question. With respect to convenience stores, we see that when something is considered a nuisance crime, it's treated that way by law enforcement, whether that's stealing gas, whether that's shoplifting, whatever it is. So, we see that in our operations. If you get more teeth into crimes for people who have skimmers, then it gets treated more seriously, and you do see that there's a reduction. That's our industry, and those are specific examples. And then you look at what happens if there is an increase in this type of activity. We see it in our stores. I mentioned 150,000 stores. There's a store per every 2,200 people, roughly. They're in every community. And you can see that communities are negatively affected. Everybody is affected by the community. Some are positive, some are negative. And when there's more negative behavior, nobody wants to go to that store. If somebody's there holding the door and they're not being polite, but it's more like, hey, do you have any extra change? It's just not very welcoming, particularly for women. So, anytime there's a degradation of a community, we're concerned.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Go ahead.
I'll try. The only aspect that I can think of is the fact that our motto is we're a department on the move. Our trains move through numerous jurisdictions. So I think that would have a very complicated impact on any surface transportation. If it's a local state a change in their policy, our train is moving through that state into the next state. And in all honesty, that's something for someone at a much higher level than me to answer.
Understand. Any other questions out there?
Yes, hello. Kator Johnson again from International Association of Flight Attendants. For those of you who don't know, we represent 50,000 flight attendants at 19 different airlines, many who do commute on Amtrak and utilize Uber. I do have a question. In the air, we have a lot of face-to-face interaction with people who might have situations. And I was curious on the train, because it's more of a go up to the cafe car and there's not a lot of interpersonal relations, what practices are being held inside of the train to prevent that and to bring awareness what's going on?
Are you asking how are we raising awareness so that that's identified?
Yes, correct. On the train specifically,
Right.
I understand, like in the stations, but specifically on the train, if there was someone with an issue, I noticed that I travel a lot. There's not any signs on the back of the train doors that I've noticed. So I was just curious
Right.
if there's anything going on inside.
There's a lot going on, and you will see those signs on the backs of the doors. It may not be on the backs of the doors because the doors move, but that is in the works, as well as in all of our stations. We actually have the QR, like I said, we have the QR codes on the restroom doors of our stations right now, but there was a bill that was passed in December that we now have to address that involves also the train cars, the restrooms and the train cars. But also our frontline employees, who are the crews on board the trains, all receive the training. They all know hopefully all know how to identify the indicators of human trafficking. And it's very easy for them to contact the Amtrak Police Department. We would be the first point of contact. That's the goal, because, we're the quickest to be able to respond on a train or in a station. And we partner with local agencies that have human trafficking task forces. We partner with HSI agents. So we would be the first best entity to arrive on a scene and determine whether or not it actually is human trafficking and take it from there.
Yes, sir.
This is a question if anybody has an answer, but maybe it's just a thought. I can think of in each one of your industries of ways that automation is creeping into replacing some of the human work, and we're talking a lot about people being eyes and ears. So if anybody has any thoughts of what there might be implementing already in places where you're doing self-checkout or automated vehicles or what have you, what does the public safety aspect look like when the eyes and ears are removed?
Yeah, I think we saw that during the pandemic. People weren't out and about as much. We have a lot of problems that were accelerated by the pandemic, say it that way. People having masks on, it's harder to recognize people. Technology can be our friend in a lot of respects, but in our industry, they have too much data already, and it's very difficult to manage all that. I heard somebody talk about she's a elite member in one of these hotels and loves it because of the service that she gets. And she says she's at such a level now where everything is automated. She checks in, she gets a key, that's her phone, never interacts with a human being. And it's super convenient, but the negative to that is she never has an interaction. So yeah, we agree with you that eyes and ears plus technology will need to work more on this as automation becomes a bigger part of everything.
Any other questions? Oh, way over there. Okay, we'll stay here. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tina Malley. I'm with Travelers Aid, and I'm based out of DCA. I have just a question about the Uber for Elise. Do you have any sort of partnerships with the airports? Because so many Ubers pick up from the airports. Are there partnerships with the airports and the people that are working within the law enforcement in the airports on, I don't know, any sort of information sharing when passengers are, if it's suspicious, something looks suspicious, but they hop into an Uber? Is there any sort of information sharing availability for that?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I can say that There are a number of folks who engage with our technology when they're being picked up and dropped off at airports. I'm happy to follow up with you on that with a colleague and let you know. But this kind of ties into the question that was just asked previously, which I think is what we saw during the pandemic. When we weren't able to do things in person, we used to host human trafficking sessions for drivers or delivery folks in person, and we weren't able to do that anymore. The advantage at Uber is we have the technology, as I've mentioned, to communicate with folks through the app. And so sending information through the app is really key. When what we can do on campuses, for instance, again, not necessarily at airports, but at campuses, for instance, we've been able to geofence certain locations so that folks who are picked off and dropped off on university campuses receive in-app safety messages with tips on how to stay safe while using rideshare on campus. So we have opportunities like that to be able to target messaging and to send important information to folks. So on the airport question specifically, I'll follow up with you on that. But yeah, that's a little bit about leveraging our technology in a way when some people might not be able to do when physical circumstances don't allow.
Last question then, go ahead.
Yeah, I was a little concerned with Elise's comment earlier relative to the reticence of other companies to get involved, worried that there's a perception or misperception maybe on their part about the downside. Because earlier I was trying to think, why isn't every company involved? And I realize there are resource issues which everybody faces. I know our FedEx colleagues here are grappling with that right now. How much can they really get involved with facing resource restrictions? That said, if you look at the program and having been with ICE from the beginning and knowing immigration enforcement is a sticky wicket, human trafficking is not a sticky wicket. It's pretty black and white, and it's pretty positive when you are involved with it. So the benefits to companies relative to corporate reputation and employee morale, when employees either get involved with making reports or hear their other colleagues doing the same and saving people from trafficking, just seems to me to be far and away outweighs any sort of concerns if somebody perceives it as overstepping their responsibility or some downside to enforcement in this area. So I'm just curious if the other panelists have seen the same thing in their areas.
Appreciate the comments. I just want to say that, first of all, thank you, but I liken human trafficking back to when President Reagan signed the drug testing law back in 1989, the executive order. And that was for anyone who had a government contract to have a drug test for their employees. But it wasn't until the private and public sector joined together and made it mandatory around the industry. To get a job, you had to be drug tested for, cause for whatever. But that's how that eliminated a lot of drug use in employment. Human trafficking needs to do the same thing. We need that public-private partnerships to go out and create this awareness and the education to eradicate it to the best that we can. I want to thank everybody for listening here today, and especially all four of you for being part of this panel. Thank you very much.